Thanks everybody for coming out. We have Mr. J. Cornelius with us tonight, president of the Atlanta Web Design Group, a consulting firm in Atlanta called 9 Labs. Super cool guy, doing really cool things in Atlanta, and he's going to lay some knowledge down tonight, so let's give him a warm welcome.
I'm bringing him with me everywhere I go. That was a great introduction. Thank you. For those of you who I have not met yet, good to meet you. I was born about 2 miles from here, so it's kind of nice to come back home. Had a little bit of a lunch with my grandmother today, so that was nice. So thanks for having me. All my info is up there. My name is Jay, just Jay. There's nothing else after that. If you misspell it, I'll be very disappointed. Feel free to tweet me, email me, whatever you want to do if you've got questions or anything. If you do tweet about what I'm talking about tonight, tag Transform Athens so we can find that stuff later. I'm happy to talk to you about anything as we go. Ultimately, what we're talking about is this concept of fluency, and we're going to look at digital experiences kind of through the lens of language fluency. Originally, humans communicated a lot like this, and now most humans communicate a lot like this, and there's this big gap in between. But ultimately, the way our brains function when it comes to communication hasn't really changed that much. So we explore this idea of fluency, which comes from the same word as fluid, which is water, just to flow smoothly. Fluency in language is typically measured in 4 skills. So we have reading, writing, speaking, and hearing, understanding, or comprehension. Having one of those skills doesn't mean that you have any of the others. So some of you might be able to understand some things in another language, but you can't read it, you can't write it, and you can't speak it very well. Some people can read a language but not speak it, so on and so forth. I think you get the idea. So in order to become really fluent, you have to have all 4 of these skills. In order to do that, you have to learn the structure of the language, how it's composed. Structure is very important to what we do in the digital world, but it's even more important to what we think about as communication. In spoken language, structure is broken down into 3 basic pieces: phonology, vocabulary, and syntax. Phonology is the sounds that we make. Vocabulary is the words that those sounds create when they're put together. And syntax is how those words come together to make sentences or thought. Once we understand all 3 of these with a certain level of fluency, we can begin to communicate. Communication is basically broken down into 2 skills: expression and comprehension. So we're here tonight, you're listening to me. Your experience is highly dependent on my ability to express myself clearly. But it's also dependent upon your ability to comprehend what I say. So if there's a breakdown somewhere in between, if the way I'm expressing myself is not something that you can comprehend, this is going to be meaningless. The same thing happens in our digital experiences. We can express ourselves in a variety of ways, but if that doesn't connect, if our viewer, if our user can't comprehend what we've done, the communication is broken and it's essentially meaningless. So we measure these 2 things with 2 skills: communicative competency and processing fluency. Communicative competence is a measure of our vocabulary, our syntax, and phonology. How well we can put all of these things together to create and communicate a thought. Processing fluency is the ease of understanding. How easy is it for you to hear what I say or to read something out of a book or a magazine and understand what is being said? And once we have a high enough level of processing fluency, we can begin to understand more and more complicated languages. And we can even fill in the blanks using context. Most of you can figure out what goes in that space. And because most of you, I'm assuming, are pretty fluent in English, even if the syntax changes, you can still understand what needs to change in that space to make sense of this sentence. Interestingly, once we have enough fluency, we don't really need to see words at all. Most of you may be familiar with this. If you're not, take a second to read it. So you'll see that our brains get so good at recognizing patterns in language. They get good at recognizing certain structures that we can read through things even when they're somewhat screwed up. Now, I did a little bit of research on this, and it turns out that it's total bullshit. Somebody made this up. They said it came from Cambridge, but it didn't. So don't believe what it actually says. The lesson is that things don't need to be perfect for us to understand them if we have a very high level of fluency. So if we relate that to the way we design digital experiences, those of us who have been doing this for a while, we're advanced, we understand how things work at a level far beyond what most of our users do. So what doesn't look broken to us, or might seem like a minor oversight to us, is a major stumbling block to them. So we think about things like metaphors, colloquialisms, idioms, and slang, and that gets into an even more complicated level of fluency. So we have things like this now, right? This is pretty common. Guessing all of you know what these are. Then we see phrases like this. I don't know how we began measuring time with a measure of temperature, but people do it. And then we see stuff like this, which before smartphones would mean meet me at the restaurant at 9. This is a super short way of communicating, but most of you in the room probably struggled with this because we didn't have to deal with it. This was foreign to us, so it wasn't easy for us to understand. Even though the person who did this knew exactly what they were typing, their communicative competency was at a level that expected your processing fluency to be the same, and it wasn't, so it broke down. All right. So we see that we have all these different ways of modifying language to suit our needs, but they all require the speaker or the communicator and the listener or the reader to have basically the same levels of processing fluency or the same levels of fluency. But even still, we can make mistakes. I'll give you an example. At my previous company, Coffee Cup, we had offices in Spain, here in Atlanta, and in the Netherlands. And I was on a trip over to Europe. I was coming back. I was tired. I'd been there for 3 weeks. I had all this Spanish and Dutch and German and stuff swimming around in my head. I'd been practicing Spanish for some time, and I considered myself, I could find the bathroom. I could order a beer. So not really quite conversational, but I was kind of comfortable. I missed my layover or my connection in Madrid. I had to spend the night. So go to the hotel. I check in. There's this really helpful old guy behind the counter. Spoke perfect English. Everything was great. I get to my room, drop my bag, realize, okay, I should probably go eat something. Don't want to deal with the menu, just want to find a restaurant. So I go back down to the lobby expecting to see the old man again. Instead, I see this. It wasn't actually her, but it was a beautiful young girl behind the counter. And I'm walking over. At the time, I was single, and I was like, well, I'm a guy, so I want to impress her. So, yeah, okay. So I walk over there. I walk up to her, and I'm thinking in my head, do you speak English? Do you speak English? I walk up to her, and I say, ¿Si habla español? She looks at me, and she kind of smiles, and she said, yeah, my English is pretty good, too. Even though I had thought, I knew how to ask her. In my head, I was thinking the right thing. I still messed up. Because I wasn't focused on what I was trying to communicate. I was focused on something else. So just because we can communicate at a certain level, and we know how to communicate at a certain level, we don't always do it, and we end up making these mistakes. All right, moving on. Now, in all parts of the world, there are places where communities come together and they speak two different languages. And in the spoken language world, there's a term called a pidgin, which is the form of communication that evolves out of two different languages where they have to communicate, but there's no real bridge. So a pidgin is kind of a bridge. And I'm proposing that we talk about a digital pidgin. This is kind of a way of a bridge between the way we communicate in the digital world and the way people are accustomed to communicating in the real world. So we've devised all these ways to communicate with pictures and text and video and all this kind of stuff. And it's basically an evolution of newspapers and magazines, but it's interactive. So we have a lot more cool toys to play with. Most of us here, I'm guessing, have been making websites or things for the web for a number of years. Now, the web only being 25 years old or so is still pretty young. So the amount of time that you have invested in the web is much higher than most of the people you are designing for. So web fluency is really kind of a new skill. Not everybody has it. And we talked about how these building blocks of language come together, vocabulary and syntax and phonology. So let's talk about the building blocks of a digital experience. You can break these down as you see here: predictability, discoverability, learnability, simplicity, efficiency, and memorability. Predictability is, does this thing do what you think it will do? Discoverability, can you find that thing when you need it? Is it intuitive? Can you figure it out? Learnability, does the interface help teach you about itself? Is it easy to uncover how this thing works and remember that? Simplicity, in this sense, is the opposite of complicated. Einstein said that everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. Efficiency is how much time or effort does it take to get this thing done. And memorability is, can you remember how to do it after not doing it for some period of time? So you go to a website and you do perform some action. You don't visit that website for 2 months. Can you remember how to perform that action when you come back to that website? And if you're more advanced, you might recognize these as a mix of Jacob Nielsen and Jesse James Garrett's ideas on usability and user experience. And those two are very closely related. Well, not the same thing. They're very closely related. We accomplish all of these things through affordances. Images, links, buttons, form fields, all that kind of stuff. Inevitably, despite our best efforts, we can make mistakes, just like I did in Spain. Instead of a helpful reply from a beautiful woman, we get communication breakdown. The difference is you can't see them when it happens, so you can't recover. Think about being in a social, 50 or so people in the room. You see someone that you recognize, you call out their name, you expect them to turn and greet you, maybe wave, maybe say your name, but if they turn and start jumping up and down and throw bananas everywhere, you're going to think that's strange, right? But you got to witness that. You got to witness that they didn't do what you expected them to, and you can do something about it. On the web, we don't have that luxury. So we think about all these other ways that even today, despite our best efforts, people do goofy things on the web. Your mom probably still sends emails with 500 people in the CC line. Faux pas, yes. Is it devastating? No, but it's still bad form because she never really figured out why. She doesn't understand. So we can attribute these different levels of competence to some work that a guy named Noel Birch did back in the 70s. And basically, he defined that there's 4 stages of competence. The first is unconscious incompetence. So this is when you don't know what you don't know. There are things that exist that we don't know about. We don't recognize they're important because we don't know that they exist, so we don't know that we don't know them. Then we have conscious incompetence. This is when you understand that there are things that you don't know, and you start to realize that those things may have a value and that maybe you should know them. Then we have conscious competence. This is when you have a skill, you're aware of it, you know how it works, you can do it, but it takes effort. This is speaking another language that you're not completely fluent in, you're not 100% comfortable, you're still in your head, you're thinking in English, but you're speaking in German or Spanish or whatever it may be. Then lastly, you have unconscious competence, and this is when you just know. It just happens. This is you speaking in your native language, whatever that may be. You don't have to think about it. Thought goes straight into words. And there is this difference between fluency and mastery. Think about the phrase, I could care less. We hear it all the time. Most people don't think that it's actually wrong. If you could care less, why don't you? You want to be saying, I couldn't care less. So most people are in this phase of conscious competence. They're trying to use the web. They feel like they have a certain level of ability to do it, but it still takes effort. It still takes thought. Even us on some websites, it takes thought for how to do things. So what we want to do is make sure that when we're designing things for people, for our audience, that we make sure we understand their level of processing fluency. Understand how they look at the site, the app, the whatever it is. Understand how they comprehend these things and speak to them at that level, not yours. So what's the problem? We end up doing this a lot, right? We always struggle with this. We struggle with getting our message across. And we can't adjust for every person's fluency level. It's simply impossible. So we need to work on our communicative competency. How can we communicate to multiple groups at the same time? It's really tough. There are a few things that stand in the way. I want to talk about cognitive bias. So there's this idea of the curse of knowledge. Chip and Dan Heath wrote a book called Made to Stick. And basically they say that once you know something, it's very difficult to put yourself in the position of someone who doesn't know it. You can't imagine what it's like to not know English. You can't imagine what it's like to not know how to type, because we all do those things. They said, I'll read the quote, "Once we know something, we find it hard to imagine what it was like not to know it. Our knowledge has cursed us, and it becomes difficult for us to share our knowledge with others because we can't readily recreate their state of mind." In a former life, I was a musician. I was a drummer in a rock band. So I want to demonstrate this. I won't do it there because of the microphone. I want to demonstrate this by tapping out a little beat, and I want you to tell me what song it is, okay? So we'll just do this over here. Got it? Everybody know what song that is? Of course you don't. I can't not hear the song because it's in my head, but you have no idea what song that is because it could be 1,000 different songs. So but there's hope because we can make adjustments for that. This is usually where somebody says, what song was it? It was My Name is Mud by Primus. Yes, I'm that old. There's this other interesting thing that researchers have found called the paradox of language acquisition. This is something where they studied kids, toddlers to maybe 5 years old, and they studied their environments, they studied their education, they studied all of these things, and they discovered that these kids were capable of creating complex grammatical structures even though they'd never been taught or exposed to those structures. So while it's mathematically not feasible for these kids to have learned these things, somehow they did. They picked it up. So it's kind of like learning by osmosis. So we can kind of use that to our advantage. There's another example that's been, did you have a question? No. Okay. There's another example of, this also been recently debunked, about the bumblebee. Have you heard about the bumblebee, that the wings are too small to carry the bumblebee's weight, but the bumblebee doesn't care. It just flies along anyway. They figured out that while the surface area of the bee's wing is not large enough to support the bee's weight in regular flight, it's the motion of the wing that allows it to do so. So even though some things look impossible to us, it's just because we haven't figured out really how they work yet. So despite having all this information, kids are able to pick up this grammar and syntax, and bumblebees can now fly. And fortunately, we work in this visual world. So not only are we relying on our words, we can use pictures, and people really like pictures. They've liked pictures since the beginning of time. I mean, this was the original newspaper. This was the original photograph. This was the original book. This is what started it all. Nobody started with letters. Nobody started with spoken word, really. We had grunts, and we had this. So what do we learn here? We know that these people have sharp things, and they have these things around, so we can guess that maybe they're eating these things. As society progressed, people got more sophisticated. The pictures that they used and the stories that were telling through those pictures became more sophisticated too. And then language evolved. Now we have hundreds of languages in the world. So things have become much more complicated. So our language in digital design is very visual. It's not just words, but it's all the things that surround those words and support those words and help focus the viewer on the right words or the right actions, all of those things. We get to use striking photos, lots of bright colors. We can make stuff blink, even though you shouldn't. We can make things scroll across the page, even though you shouldn't. We can do all of these things. So how do we know that we're designing visually in a way that is easy to comprehend? I turned to a guy named George Berkoff. He did something called the aesthetic measure, which is basically a mathematical equation for beauty. We know the golden rule. We know some of these things exist. We see things happen in nature all the time that we can replicate in math. The Fibonacci sequence maps out very well to many natural forms. So there's a precedent there that predates Berkoff, but what he did was pretty interesting. There we are. Is he found a mathematical theorem that rates order versus complexity. This is the equation, if you'd like to write it down. There will be a test later, so I advise you do so. I'm just kidding. I'll tell you what it means. Vertical symmetry, V. E is equilibrium. R is rotational symmetry. HV is the relation of the polygon to a horizontal vertical network. So you think about snapping to the grid. You think about placements. If any of you have taken a photography course, they put that little, divide it in 9 squares, and you're supposed to put the person's face on one of those intersections type of thing. F is a general negative factor for unsatisfactory form. So if we look at some examples with their scores underneath, we see the square is the easiest thing to digest. It's the easiest thing for us to understand. That's the most pleasing thing for us to look at. Then we have, there's actually one that's not here that's just as pleasing, which is the circle. As it goes down, you see these shapes get more and more complex, and the score drops correspondingly. If you listen to, you kind of listen to your gut, you'll see that that's actually true. You don't like looking at this anywhere near as much as this. So how does this work in art? So here we have a piece of art, and he's drawn some lines over here, and you can start to see the symmetry in these lines and how it maps to the characters in the painting. So we can find a mathematical formula for how visually appealing things are. Think about pyramids, flowers, all of these things. You can all be described with a mathematical formula, and it all maps very well to his theorem. So we like to look at beautiful things, but not just because they're beautiful. It's like we imply value based on beauty. And it might seem shallow, it might seem petty, but it's true. I'll give you an example. Tell me which of these statements is true. Ukraine's been in the news recently, so this should be easy. Anybody have a guess? Nope. The top one's true? You say the bottom one's true? Who says top? One. Who says bottom? More. Okay, good. I set the question up properly then. This is true. But it doesn't look true, does it? It's hard to believe because it's ugly. It's in a weird color that doesn't match the rest of everything else. The typeface is all jacked up. The lesson is that aesthetically pleasing things are more likely to be considered true. And since we're designing in a visual medium, we have to consider that. Being trustworthy, being considered high value is probably important for the clients you design for or for yourselves if you're doing your own work. And that's part of communication. If I don't seem trustworthy, you're less likely to believe anything I say when I'm standing here. So a certain amount of trustworthiness is important to our designs. Our senses engage our emotions, and what we perceive affects how we feel. We talk about going to a happy place, which we can do in our minds. Even a smell can trigger a memory. Seeing a child playing in the park might make you smile. There's all types of things that we get from the outside world that affect how we feel internally. Our designs are no different. Our emotions help guide our thoughts. And this is where it becomes especially important. As we have gut feelings, we say things like love is blind, and we can make blundering mistakes when we're overcome by emotion. And sometimes we do silly or stupid things just based on emotion. So few things really expose the dichotomy between rational thought and emotion like the stock market. So let's go through one other example real quick. Most people pick stocks based on equal measures of fact and emotion. I really like this company, and the P/E ratio is really good, so I'm going to invest. Or the price is at my threshold. I can buy 100 shares. Yay, I'm going to do that. Two guys at Princeton, Adam Alter and David Oppenheimer, did a study about predicting short-term stock value based on processing fluency. Here's the chart. They basically rated easy to pronounce and understand ticker symbols versus ones that were unpronounceable. That's the only factor they looked at. They didn't look at anything about the company's value, what the company did, who the management team was, any of that. And as you can see, pronounceable symbols typically ranked higher, even into a year later. If we go further out into the future, you can see that the percentage price is pretty drastic change. Just because a ticker symbol was more pronounceable gave it more value to the stockholder. So it's important to understand what we're saying, but it's also important to understand how we're saying it. Just because what we say is valid, if we say it strangely, like that sentence I put up there with the weird typography and color, it might be hard to believe. It might not be trustworthy. Another funny story. Our CFO at Coffee Cup was a Dutch guy. One day we're at lunch, and we're both sitting across the table from each other. And he says, "What do you call the rest of your food?" "Leftovers." "That's a really weird thing to call the rest of your food." I was like, "Why? You had food, and this is what's left over. It's leftovers." And he's like, he's puzzled, and he's like, No. What do you call the rest of your food?" I'm like, "Are you trying to say the wrist of your foot?" Yeah, that's what I mean." I was like, "Oh, that's called an ankle." He's like, "Oh, we have the same word, ankle." So because of his accent, what he was saying was true, what it was valid, it's exactly what he meant to say, but how he said it caused the communication breakdown. In ancient Greece, poetry was the highest form of language art. It was the top notch. It's the best thing you could do. And in poetry, as in language, consistent tone and tempo are important. So we start to see the beginnings of a cycle between the tone and the tempo. It has to be smooth, and that gets into like music, and all of these other things come from there. Consistency and tone are important in visual design as well. So I want to show you the circle or the cycle of experience. This is what everybody does every single time they interface, they use any piece of software, website, anything. There's a trigger. The example we'll use is, I want to buy shoes. That's my trigger. So I go to Zappos, open up the site. Now, I have an expectation. Is this the site? Is this Zappos? I'm good. So that was the expectation. Then we go to proximity. How do I find shoes on Zappos? I find something that says shoes. Great. Now, am I aware that that's the thing that says shoes? Is it clear to me? Does it say the word shoes? Is it a picture of a shoe? Is it in English? So am I aware that that's what I need to do? Once I make that awareness, do I make the connection that that's the thing I have to click to get me closer to shoes? That's the action I need to take, is clicking the thing. Then I expect a response. That response is evaluated, and the cycle starts over again. Did this get me closer to the shoes I'm looking for? Yes. Okay, great. Now there's another trigger. I'm finding something else. The cycle repeats and repeats and repeats and repeats until finally I am seeing the order confirmation page. That's the ideal, right? But if at any point in any part of the cycle, in all of the steps in that process, the communication breaks down. I get an error page as the most glaring example, or I click on shoes and it shows me socks. Maybe I click on a brown shoe and it shows me a blue one. These are ways that the communication breaks down and I start to lose trust. I start to lose my faith in that this process is going to work, and the experience breaks. This happens a lot more often in a lot more subtle ways than most of us realize. There's something known as the engineer's dilemma, where the person who built something automatically knows how it works, so why would it work any other way? A great example is these are credit card machines that only accept the card if you put it in that one way, because the stripe is right there. I know from my previous experience in the music business, those little card readers are like maybe 5 cents a piece. So it's going to cost them an extra 15 cents to put one, no matter which way you put the card in. But the engineer doesn't think that way. The engineer knows where the reader thing is, so he always puts his card in the same way and doesn't see a problem. This happens to us all the time. So there's a couple things that we can look at to understand how experience happens and how we can create better experiences by looking at the psychology of how people understand things, how processing fluency works on the receiver's end. Familiarity bias is a very good one. We like things that we already know. We tend to go back to the restaurants that we like over and over again. We drink the same brand of beer, or eat the same brand of pizza, order the same brand of shoes, go from the same stores. All of these things happen every day. Familiarity bias is very, very strong. When scanning new information, we tend to be drawn to things that stand out. In a sea of yellow, we're going to notice the green or the red. Grouping information into familiar, manageable chunks helps us to understand it and recall it later. So grouping is very important. By putting a few things together, they appear to be related. And that's an important thing to remember. If you have things that are not related to each other, don't put them next to each other. Because proximity is a very powerful effect. Think about a few people in a room. Say we've got 6, 7 people in a room. 3 of them are over here. 3 of them are over there. You're going to assume if you walk into that room, those 3 people know each other, and those 3 people know each other, but the 2 groups might not know each other. By the same token, if you've got the same 2 groups of 3 people, but one person in each group is wearing the exact same t-shirt, you're going to think that those 2 people are related, even though they're not close to each other. So think about how those things play with each other and study your designs to see what messages you're subliminally sending to the reader, to the viewer, to the user, these principles. There's connectedness. Things that are connected by uniform visual properties are perceived to be related. That's the 2 t-shirts in the separate groups. This is a very important one. We're more likely to complete complicated tasks when they're broken down into smaller steps. I saw this in my own life not so long ago. I've got a 10-year-old boy. A few years ago, I was saying, man, you got to start doing your own laundry. I'm not doing it for you. Like, wash your clothes. He's like, okay. So he just took all of his stuff and just threw it in the washer. I'm like, whoa, time out. Time out. That's not how it works. You got to separate things out. So I had to break it down into smaller steps before he could understand how to do it properly. I'm really surprised that he didn't just jump in the shower and say, I'm washing my clothes. Right? There's also a very strong need for certainty. When we click a button, we want to know what's going to happen on the other side. We've all seen scary short links and we're like, I don't know, man. I'm not clicking that. That might take me someplace I don't want to go. So we have this need to know what's going to happen. So we've talked about a bunch of different theories, a bunch of different psychological biases, different ways that our brains work. Let's look at some real stuff. Links mean go, buttons mean do. This is something that's kind of low level to people. When they see a link, they know they're going to go to a new page. When they see a button, they expect it to do something. It might go to a new page, it might not, but they expect some action to happen. Those of you who are more on the nerdy end, so links are a GET request buttons are a post request, right? Talking with all the web developers that I have, I've come to think that web developers are just insatiably hungry because this thing is everywhere. Oh, no, sorry, this thing. How many apps have we seen this thing on? How many grandmas know what it is? I'm betting the number's pretty close to 0. Does that help? That helps, right? It's a little bit better. What about that? Now it looks like a button, or does it? Now it really looks like a button, but I mean, that's kind of cumbersome. What about this? Well, now it's just a word. But all of those things could do the same thing. There's a guy named James Foster that ran some A/B tests on this, and what he found was that was clicked 2.4% of the time. So he decided to change it up. Let's just use the word menu. So now that's clicked 1.9% of the time. This is bad because we've just lost a significant portion of the activity that we're trying to get people to do. So let's make it look more like a button. Now we see some progress. This is a 5.7% increase. Most people would be happy. How many people would love a 5.7% increase in pay? Be nice, right? How about a 12.9% increase? You see what happened here? Now it looks like a button. Buttons do things. 3 little hamburger lines, who knows? I don't know about you, but I mean 12.9%, that's pretty significant, right? So let's look at some examples. These are things that I found in my travels that I'm just completely shocked at. How the hell did this ever get past QA? This is, I don't know, Marriott or something. Apparently I was in room 841. I'm trying to get online. What do I do here? I mean, really? And you guys are web people. You know how stuff works, and you're looking at this going, what the hell? Yeah. So the links on this page are right there. They're plain text surrounded by square brackets. That's the way they decided to do it. And there's absolutely nothing saying that that is the thing I really need to be focused on. This thing has all my attention. Why? Remember those principles we talked about earlier? It stands out. Contrast. Right? Here's another one. This is registering for some event somewhere. Dress was business casual. That's cool. What do I do here? Now, granted, this might be hard to read, but the point is, I mean, you should be able to figure it out, right? Even at somewhat of a distance. The button you're supposed to click is right there. That's the one that says register. Now pay close attention. Look at this button. It's got this little round thing, this little indent, it says register. Then on the next page, this is what it gives you. So, what do we do now? You see how the cycle of experience had been broken like 5 times already? You're supposed to click that. Put your email address in and click that. And then on the next page, look. Now you got to click this, which is a whole different thing. Again, just terrible, terrible stuff. Now this was designed by somebody. Whether it's good design or bad design is up to you. But this was designed. This is intentional. Someone did this on purpose. Now, think about all the ways that the things we do on purpose can be changed without our permission, without our knowledge. We live in a world now where there's 400 different screen sizes. Things can move around. Things get goofed up. Pretty sure that's not the headline they intended to print. This is not the message they're trying to send. So these things can happen, and we can't do anything about it. Right? Don't let this be you. It's important that you have to shift your perspective. You have to try as best you can. Even though we're cursed by our own knowledge, you have to try as best you can to put yourself in the shoes of the person using your product. Remember the core principles of communication, not just design. It's more than pretty colors and text and things. We get distracted a lot by the interaction. We get distracted by all this powerful stuff that we can do, the horsepower of all this code, and CSS is awesome, but that's not helping the experience unless we keep in mind what experience we're trying to create to begin with. My vocabulary is not the greatest in the world, but I know a few multisyllabic words, can't always pronounce them. But if I stood up here and was talking like a particle physicist in all of their words, it wouldn't work. I'd be demonstrating all the horsepower my brain has. I'm smart, I can do things. But it doesn't matter because it's not appropriate for the audience. We have to remember that there's many different ways that we can approach our work. And a shift in perspective is needed for every project, for everything we work on, to make sure that we're in alignment, to make sure that our communication is happening effectively. We have to be the ones with a high enough communicative competency to recognize the level of processing fluency our users have and try to adjust to it. Remember that you can't force people to understand your design. You have to respect their understanding. You have to respect their level of fluency. And then we can have good communication. Thanks for having me. How are we on time?
Perfect.
Perfect?
Yeah.
I like perfect.
So if you guys have any questions that you guys want to ask Jay, it's 7:15. We're welcome to stay here until 8 or whenever. I'm assuming, we'll open it up for Q&A for a little bit. And
Sure. What do you guys want to talk about?
How long ago was that menu button A/B tested? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
How long ago was the menu button A/B tested?
That was within the last 45 days. It's pretty recent. And the link, these slides are up. They're there. These slides are up. You can download the PDF, and the link is in there. If you want to go check out the site. Great.
I was just wondering if you could tell us what you did at Coffee Cup and then how that informed all of this that you shared with us tonight.
Wait, how are we on time? So at Coffee Cup, that role morphed quite a bit. I was there for 14 years. So as you can imagine, we were 2 people, and then we were 40 people. Towards the end, when as the web evolved, it was more than just a white page with black text and blue links. My focus was split pretty evenly between the software and the website itself. Google AdWords came along, so we feel like, oh man, we better optimize our landing pages. This is important stuff. So we started looking at how we could do that. So A/B testing kind of came into it. On the software side, it's a little bit more difficult because you have that remote, you get that instant feedback. So we would do small focus group type things, which I'm not a big fan of focus groups. That experience kind of ruined me on focus groups. One-on-one is cool, get a bunch of people in the room. I don't like it because you get groupthink happening. One person will say, well, I think this, and everyone else goes, yeah. And you don't get anywhere. So being split between like a desktop tool that you couldn't get immediate feedback on, and that you had a much longer iteration, a longer cycle to get something developed, and being on the web, which was really fast, what I found is that things we learned on the web informed what we did in the software. So ultimately, outside of like the operational stuff and everything else, ultimately my job was to study how people used things and try to find ways to make it easier for them to do it. Because our product was aimed at beginners and intermediates. We were not the Adobe. We weren't going for the high-end web design. We were going for the hobbyist who was just going to make a website in a weekend. And we wanted to find all the easy ways to guide them through things. So we had kind of an internal phrase that we would use. It's like, we make it easier to make websites. We never talked about that in the real world. We should. An example might be in 2000, I guess. Well, yeah, it was 2000. We had an FTP app, and people kept coming to us saying, great, I made my website, where do I put it? Well, maybe we should start a web hosting company. So we did. And by default, when you downloaded the FTP app, our servers were already, our free servers were already plugged in. So we could tell them, just download our app, find your directory, and push publish, and your website will be online. And that grew. We started that in, I want to say it was September of 2000, and by the end of Q1 2001, we had, I think it was around 9,000 paid customers on that platform, which is pretty rapid growth. And back then, it's a bit different than the numbers today. And that grew because we made that process very simple. We thought about that process from the perspective of the user, not the perspective of, oh, what do you mean you don't understand FTP? It's file transfer protocol, man, come on. We can't educate them that quickly. So I hope that answers your question. It's really just finding the simplest way you can make it work for them. We're the smart people in the room, we should figure it out. Anyone else? What's something to talk about? Nope.
All
Yes?
right. Well, I guess.
Oh.
Go for it.
Wait.
Like
I have an incentive.
when you have a situation where you've got a designer and you've got a developer, or you have a team of developers and a team of designers, do you have a percentage of how you split that up to have a functional website that has good design and operates correctly?
If I'm understanding your question right, if we have a team of designers and a team of developers, how do we split their roles, or how do we split their time?
Yeah. Both ways.
I think that, first off, if you have a team of designers and a team of developers, you're doing it wrong. They need to be together. And they need to understand each other's language to some extent, and they need to be working on the same cycles. So the designer needs to be able to understand why that thing can't do that thing, because the software doesn't work that way. And the developer needs to be able to see that the designer needs it to work that way, because that's the way that people expect it to, so they can figure out a way to do that. So the more commingled and the more they work together, the better. In terms of how you split the time, I think that's going to be different for a lot of projects. If it's a real visual heavy project, that's probably more on the design team. They're going to end up spending more time and effort doing that. If it's more application heavy thing, then obviously that's going to be more on the developers. But really, those teams need to work together. They need to be as integrated as possible.
So right now it seems like the thing that's coming down the tracks that people are out in front in terms of building and designing things are is motion, right? We're starting to bring in motion as importance, right?
Right.
That's the next thing people are building. Do you see anything task motion as the next thing that people are going to start building?
Other than like voice and like ambient things, location, like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think all of that's important. Where I see design going, now wearables are kind of the hip thing. Everyone's got a stupid watch or whatever. Or they've got Fitbits, that type of thing. That's cool now. And that's where all the VC is going, into that type of technology, but also into ambient technologies like Nest. I see those two things kind of merging together. Geofencing is going to be important. Why can't my house know when I'm in the bedroom and automatically do certain things for me because it knows I'm there based on the time of day? Like 11 o'clock at night, when I walk into the bedroom, drop the thermostat, start some music, whatever it is. I've got a thing going that that's my routine. I want my house to know my routine. And I don't want to program my routine. I want my house to learn my routine. So those types of things are going to be really
That's really hard though.
It is really hard.
Because even Nest got whacked with their wave your arms to shut it off.
Totally, yeah, totally. It's really hard. But look at where we've come in the last 15 years. Like, I was just thinking today that I remember the Amazon commercials, most of you probably do too, when they had to say HTTP : now you just say Amazon.com and everybody knows, right? But back then it was really hard to get people to go to a website. And making websites was really hard. But we solved those problems. And I think that's something that in the next decade we'll probably solve them, because there's more and more people attracted to technology now. And we have more tools to build on. We have more things that we can use. We know a lot more about how people work, and we're starting to understand the psychology of how people interface with technology. That the hitch in my mind is going to be privacy. Is how much information do you want to share? Like, do I really want my house knowing all these things about me? Do I want my fridge to heckle me when I grab that pint of ice cream because it knows that I'm trying to trim my body fat or something, or it knows that I'm supposed to go on a run at 6 a.m. and do I want it to just lock itself? You know, I mean, those types of things could happen.
Yeah. So kind of as we move further up the stack in terms of having more of the infrastructure and stuff taken care of, moving more towards getting back to us being human beings living in the physical world. Sort of.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that that eventually technology is just going to disappear and kind of weave itself into the fabric of our daily lives, and that's where I want it to be. Now that gets kind of Orwellian in a way, and some people are scared of that. You know, if any of you are religious and you're scared of the number of the beast thing in your arm, right? And that's going to happen. It just kind of depends on your perspective of what's the number of the beast. Some people think that your phone is already that thing, right? Because it's with you all the time. It knows all the stuff about you. It has your identity in it. Without getting too philosophical about it, yeah, that's what technology needs to do. Technology needs to enhance our lives, not make it more difficult. So why would we want to sit down and type when we can talk? So as language dictation software becomes better, you know, Siri is a big step, but it's not really that great. If you've ever really tried to use Siri to do stuff, you know it's kind of a pain in the ass. But as the technology advances, why wouldn't I be able just to get in my car and say, take me to work, and then take a nap? That'd be awesome, but we're not there yet. Somebody, yeah, you got a question?
Do you have a recommended methodology for determining the fluency of your end users?
I think the best thing to do is just talk to them.
What?
You could, actually one of Greg's former colleagues, Jim Downs, did some pretty cool work, and that, you know, if you guys still follow some of the stuff that she did or still use, I don't even know if it was.
Laptop hugging method?
I knew she was doing it, but the hug method is cool for studying mobile devices. I don't know if you know what that is, but like people on an iPad, she'd take a laptop with the camera on, make them hold it backwards, like hug it, and so she could watch them do stuff on an iPad. So the best thing to do is find them in their environment. So go to their home, their office, their coffee shop, whatever it is. Get them as comfortable and as close to their actual environment when they're going to be using your thing as they would be using it, and just talk to them and just get out of their way and just watch.
I know see some of those heat mapping type things, right? It says, you know, they went over to this area of your site.
Yeah, you can do all that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, you know, that kind of borders between qualitative and quantitative data.
Yeah.
You can use that, but don't use that as your only tool.
Right. Because some people just kind of just in the house sitting there.
Yeah. Well, there was a study, I think it was Jared Spool did this study where they brought people in and asked them to search for something like a printer cartridge on somebody's website. And one woman just sat at the screen for like 3 minutes and stared. And she's like, and he asked, finally, somebody, the researcher asked, what are you doing? She's like, I can't find the search box. Because, you know, we're all used to it being in the top right corner. They put it in the bottom left. And she didn't scroll. She couldn't find the search box. So there's nothing that beats talking to and observing your users. Nothing beats that.
So, what are your thoughts on doing that similar, like you're talking to the old lady, she can't find the search box. What are your thoughts on like that small sample size for your user? Like, because I've been involved in a few like tests where it's like, it was obvious that the person that was doing the testing was like kind of anxious to get out of there, and they weren't like, right. And you kind of use that, you get one person that couldn't find the search box, and all of a sudden we got to redesign the search. And
yeah. Well, it's the my mom syndrome, right? It can be dangerous to have too small of a sample size, but some sample size is better than no sample size. So you're going to learn something from everybody, and it might lead you in the wrong direction temporarily, but if you start that process of talking to people and interviewing people, and understanding how they use stuff, then that becomes part of your design habits, and then you're going to be doing much better work. You're going to understand more about how people use stuff. Ask for people, just walk up to randoms on the street. Say, hey man, you got 5 minutes? I'll give you $5 if you just, use this thing. Just try to find a pair of brown shoes. Show me how it works. They'll do it. Well, some people won't, but a lot of people will do it. Ask not your direct colleagues, because they're probably not the sample, But if you're targeting tech people, talk to the tech people. Don't talk to your mom. If you're building a site for nerds, why would you ask your mom?
Yeah.
She's not your user. She's not the person that's going to use it. Go find some nerds and talk to them. If you're building a site for doctors, you know, why would you talk to attorneys? You know, it doesn't make any sense. So find people who closely match your target and just talk to them. Have a conversation. And I think one of the things that it took me a little bit of time to understand is just relax. Just kick back and let it take its time. Don't expect answers in the first 2 to 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Just kick back, let them get comfortable. They're going to struggle at first because they're nervous. Fine. So kind of wipe out that first couple of minutes of data and then just watch them do things. And there's some things you can do. I know people have written about it. I can't think of any references offhand. People have written about how to give, like the first task is like a distractor task to get all that weird crap out of the way. And the second task is actually what you want to study. So that way you kind of get all that funk out of their system. And then say, okay, cool, you did great. So now that you've done that, can you do this? And then that's what you actually want to look at. Anyone else? No stickers. I should just pass them out if you would.
When are you delivering this to Ted?
When at TED?
Yeah.
Whenever they invite me, I guess. I haven't been invited. Oddly enough, we, I don't know if I should talk about this or not. Is that thing going?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Okay.
We'll edit it out.
Yeah.
We can do that.
That's what they all say.
No, I haven't been asked. If someone wants to drop my name in the hat, it'd be... this would have to squeeze down to like 12 minutes to work for TED. So. Yeah. I did this at Remix South, and I've done this at Great Wide Open. I'm doing it at Converge in Columbia in a couple weeks, and I'm doing it at Web Visions twice later this year. So, yeah.
So how do you deal with design when you have to take into account the more global user base and like different cultural shifts and how people interact?
Yeah, great. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So how do you deal with design with different cultures? Especially with stuff like maybe the language goes a different direction, left to right, right to left, top to bottom, that type of thing. Colors are important there too, because I know in some cultures, like red might mean one thing to Western culture, but it means something completely different to Eastern cultures. So you have to be aware of those things. The best thing to do, again, is talk to those people. Is if you can't talk to them directly, find somebody who understands that culture and just use them as a proxy. And that'll get you closer. It won't get you all the way, but it'll get you closer. And then as you get, I guess, further down that design process, and when you really start digging into those details, try to find some representative of that culture. And just bring them in and ask them. I mean, there's nothing beats talking to a real person. And I know it gets complicated. We're working on a site now that's going to be in 6 languages, including Arabic. So we're like, fine. Spanish, French, German, no problem. They say Arabic, oh, not because it's because it's written backwards, right?
Yeah.
And like you have to have larger typeface to a certain point because of the detail of the letter and stuff like that. So it's a whole different set of challenges for a different language, and then the cultural stuff comes into it too. So that's a great question. I think I saw somebody else had something. All right, you had I like the culture question, so you get your choice. You want an AWDG shirt, or you want the shut up, get to work shirt?
ATW.
I don't know if that's going to fit. I didn't look at the sizes. This one's a large.
Not even the one fit.
Sorry.
Nightgown.
I just grabbed a couple off the shelf. So, who had the design team question?
Kelly.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Can you wear a large?
Sure.
Good, because that's all I got. I'm happy to stick around for like another half an hour or so. If you want to do that here, if you want to go somewhere, whatever you guys want to do is cool.
Yeah,
But
there's.
eventually I got to make it back to the.
Yeah, absolutely. We still have probably a few things downstairs. So if you guys, some of you have been here before, you can just hang out. And if you have trash, please make your way to wherever the trash can went, right over there.
And I'll remind you, my contact info is there. email me, tweet me, whatever. If you got any questions, if you want to know more about this stuff, go get the slides, check that stuff out. You'll see on the website when you go there, I am writing a book on this. So if you put your email address in there, I'll give you 50% off when the book comes out.
Let's give Jay a round of applause.